rock racks. The contractor's name was Phil Decker. He had a company called Decker and Sons out of Nashua, and my brother-in-law had used him twice before, which is the only reason I called him. I wasn't ready to have strangers in the house. I wasn't ready for a lot of things that year. My mother had passed in March. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 11 weeks, and I spent most of those 11 weeks driving back and forth on Route 3 between my apartment in Manchester and her house in Milford, sleeping on her couch, reheating soup she wouldn't eat, watching game shows with the volume too loud because her hearing had gotten worse, and she was too stubborn to admit it. When she died, it was a Tuesday morning and I was there, and I held her hand, and then I drove home and sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for about 40 minutes before I could make myself go inside. She left me the house. She left me the house. She left me everything, actually. I am an only child. My father has been gone since I was 9 years old. A heart attack at 44, and so it had always been just the two of us. The house in Milford, the savings account, the old Ford pickup she hadn't driven in 3 years, and the attic. I didn't think about the attic for a long time. There was too much else to think about. Probate, the lawyer's fees, selling the pickup, going through her clothes, which is the kind of thing nobody warns you about, how physical it is, how you open a closet and the smell of someone hits you before your brain even catches up. I donated 4 bags to Goodwill and kept 1 cardigan because it still smelled like her, and I wasn't ready to let that go either. I wasn't planning to sell the house right away. Maybe someday. I wasn't sure. I'd grown up there. I knew the way the third step creaked, and I knew where the draft came in under the kitchen door in winter. And I knew the particular sound the furnace made when it first kicked on in October. This low moan, like it was complaining about the cold. Selling it felt like something I'd have to work up to, but the roof was another matter. My mother had mentioned it once, maybe 2 years before she got sick, that some of the shingles on the north side were lifting. I'd gone up there with a ladder and looked, and it hadn't seemed urgent at the time. But Milford gets real winters, and 2 real winters later, Phil Decker's guy found soft spots in 3 places when he did the inspection. Water damage? Not catastrophic, he said, but not something to ignore either. I said fine. Schedule it. Phil gave me a 2-week window in late September. Told me they'd start with the north side and work their way around, and that I didn't need to be there for most of it. But I should be reachable by phone. I gave him my cell number. I told him I worked remotely so I'd be around. The first 3 days were unremarkable. I could hear them on the roof from inside the house. The scrape and thud of old shingles coming off. The nail gun. The occasional burst of laughter from one of the crew. I made coffee and I worked, and I tried not to think too hard about the fact that my mother had lived here for 31 years and now strangers were walking across her roof. On the 4th day, Phil called me at 10:15 in the morning. I remember I was at the kitchen table with my laptop and a half-eaten piece of toast. I saw his name on my phone and I figured it was something routine. A material question. A timeline update. He said, "Hey, it's Phil, listen. Are you at the house right now?" I said I was. He said, "Okay, good. Something came up. I need you to come up to the attic if you don't mind. Just you, though. Can you do that?" I asked him what he meant by just me. There was a pause. Not a long one. He said, "There's something up here you're going to want to see before anyone else does. That's all I'll say on the phone." I went up. The attic in my mother's house is accessed through a pull-down staircase in the upstairs hallway. She used it for storage. The way people use attics. Boxes of Christmas ornaments. My old school projects she'd never been able to throw away. A broken floor fan she'd always meant to have repaired. Suitcases she hadn't used since a trip to see a cousin in Portland sometime in the 90s. I had been up there once since she died, briefly, just to confirm it was full of exactly what I expected. Phil was crouched near the far end, near the north eave, where his crew had been working. He was holding a flashlight. One of his guys was on the roof above us and I could hear him moving around. Phil looked up when I came through the hatch. He said, "I'm sorry to drag you up here. I want to show you something, and I want you to decide what you want to do about it before the guys come back down." I made my way across the joists to where he was. The light was gray and dusty. The smell was old insulation, and something faintly sweet I couldn't identify. He aimed the flashlight at the eave. There was a section of loose board he had clearly already moved aside, and in the gap between the exterior wall and the framing, wedged in so that you wouldn't see it unless you were pulling things apart, was a metal box. Not a toolbox. Not a storage container. It was more like a document box, the kind you'd find at an office supply store. Gray metal with a black plastic handle on top and a small combination lock on the front. Maybe 12 inches wide, 8 inches deep? Phil said it was behind the insulation bat. The bat was pulling away from the wall anyway because of the moisture, so we moved it to assess, and there it was. I didn't touch it. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked at him. He said, "I've been doing this 22 years. Found some things in walls, old newspapers, a bottle of whiskey once, no kidding, 1987 Jim Beam, still sealed. Found a mason jar with cash in a crawl space in Concord, never found something locked. I asked him if he had any idea what the combination might be. He said he figured I might have a better shot at that than he did. I crouched down and I looked at it. The lock was a 3-digit combination. I tried the obvious ones first. My mother's birthday. Mine. The year she bought the house. The year my father died. Nothing opened it. I sat there for a moment with the flashlight in my hand and I thought about her, about the way she kept things. She was organized to a fault. Everything labeled. Everything in its place. She kept a small address book in the kitchen drawer even though she had a smartphone, because she said she didn't trust phones. She kept paper copies of everything. I tried the year my parents got married. 1987. The latch opened. Inside the box there were 3 things. A manila envelope, sealed, with my name written on the front in her handwriting. A smaller envelope, also sealed, with an address in Concord I didn't recognize. And a single key on a plain metal ring, the kind that would fit a safe deposit box. I picked up the envelope with my name on it. The handwriting was hers, unmistakably, but it was shakier than I remembered. Like she had written it when her hands weren't steady. Phil said he'd give me a minute, and he went back to the other end of the attic, and I heard him talking quietly to the guy on the roof, telling him to take a break. I opened the envelope. She had written 6 pages. Legal pad paper, her tight, slanted cursive, and the date at the top was November of the previous year, 4 months before she was diagnosed. I didn't understand that right away. I had to read the first 2 pages twice before the timeline started to make sense. She had found out about the money in August. Her financial advisor, a man she had trusted for 11 years, a man named Arthur Fleck, who ran a small independent practice out of an office on Elm Street in Milford and who had handled her IRA and her savings account since shortly after my father died. She had found a discrepancy. She had found it herself by accident, because she'd been thinking about updating her will, and she'd pulled together all her account statements and gone through them the old-fashioned way, on paper, with a yellow highlighter and a calculator. And the numbers didn't match what she'd been told. She wrote, "I went back 18 months. I can see it clearly now. Small withdrawals, never the same amount twice, never large enough to trigger a call from the bank. The fees he documented don't match any schedule he ever showed me. I don't know how long it was going on before that. I do know that by August I could see at least $14,000 I cannot account for." I stopped reading. I looked up at the ceiling of the attic, at the light coming through the gaps where the old shingles had been pulled off, pale September light, and I thought about her sitting at her kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of paper statements and figuring this out alone. I kept reading. She had confronted Arthur in September. She had gone to his office without an appointment, and she had sat down across from him, and she had put the statements on his desk, and she had asked him to explain the discrepancies. He had been calm. She wrote that he was very calm. He told her there had been a software transition at his custodial firm, that some statements had been generated incorrectly, that it would be corrected in the next cycle. He showed her something on his computer. She wasn't entirely sure what she'd been looking at. She left feeling uncertain, but not satisfied. She went back in October with a list of specific dates and specific amounts. He was not calm that time. She wrote, "He told me I was confused." He used that word, confused. He said I was misreading the documents. He said I should let him handle it and stop worrying. He walked me to the door. I have never felt so stupid in my life, and I have never been so sure at the same time that I was right. After that, she had started keeping records. She opened a new email account he didn't have access to. She started forwarding statements to it. She took photographs of documents on his desk when he left the room once during an appointment she scheduled under the pretense of reviewing her asset allocation. She contacted a forensic accountant in Concord. That was the second envelope, I realized, the one with the Concord address. A woman named Janet Riley, who she had found through the State Bar's referral service. Janet Riley had confirmed her suspicions. The number by then was closer to $22,000, going back approximately 3 years. My mother had written, "I know what you are thinking. You are thinking, why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you tell me? I want to explain." She explained. She had been frightened, not of Arthur specifically. She wrote that she didn't believe he was violent. But she had been through the process of my father dying without a will, the mess of it, the 2 years it had taken to sort out, the legal fees that had eaten into what little there was to sort out. She was frightened of what it would mean to open up her financial life to scrutiny. She was frightened of being wrong, of being called confused again, this time publicly. She was 71 years old. She had spent her whole life being careful with money, being responsible, and the idea that she had trusted the wrong person for 11 years was something she was still, she wrote, trying to process. And there was one more thing. She wrote, "Arthur handles accounts for at least 3 other people I know personally. People from church. Barbara and Jean. Phyllis. I don't know how to tell them without telling you first. I don't know how to tell you without having something solid in hand. Janet says we're close. I'm waiting for her to finish the full analysis. I was going to tell you at Christmas. I was going to have everything ready." She was diagnosed in January. She didn't tell me about Arthur because she didn't want to put 2 things on me at once. She didn't want me sitting at her bedside worrying about money when she needed me focused on her. She wrote that this was probably a mistake, and that she was sorry. She wrote, "The safe deposit key in this box is at First New England Bank on Amherst Street in Milford. Janet's full report is in there along with printed records of the transactions going back 3 years and the photographs I took. She knows to expect you. I have already authorized your access. Her number is on the envelope." She wrote, "I know this is a lot to put on you after everything. I know you have had a hard year. But I could not leave without making sure you had what you needed to finish this. He should not get away with it. Please make sure he doesn't." And then, in smaller letters at the bottom of the last page, "The cardigan in the blue bin in my closet still has a 20 in the pocket. Get yourself a decent dinner." I sat in the attic for a long time after that. Phil found me still sitting there maybe 20 minutes later. He came over quietly and sat down on a beam next to me and didn't say anything, which was the right call. I told him I was going to need a few days before they continued the work. He said take whatever I needed. He said he'd pull the crew off the job and they'd come back whenever I was ready. He didn't ask me what was in the box. I have thought about that since, about how much that small decency meant to me. He just handed me back my privacy and walked away. I called Janet Riley the next morning. She remembered my mother immediately, warmly, and she was sorry for my loss in a way that sounded like she meant it. She told me the report she'd filed documented approximately $26,000 in unauthorized withdrawals over a period of approximately 3 years and 2 months. She said she had been prepared to testify on my mother's behalf. She said she was prepared to testify on mine. I went to First New England Bank on a Thursday. The woman at the desk checked my ID and my authorization paperwork and took me back to the safe deposit room, and I opened the box with the key from the attic. Inside was everything my mother had promised. The printed account statements, the photographs, a USB drive, Janet's formal report in a manila folder with tabs and highlighted sections and handwritten margin notes in my mother's careful cursive. I took everything to an attorney I found through the New Hampshire Bar Association's referral service, a woman who handled financial elder abuse cases. She looked at the documents for 45 minutes in her office while I drank bad coffee and watched the parking lot. She told me it was a strong case. She told me to file a complaint with the New Hampshire Bureau of Securities Regulation first, before any civil action, because it created a paper trail that would help everything that came after. I filed the complaint. The Bureau opened an investigation within 2 weeks. They contacted Janet. They pulled Arthur Fleck's records. He had 23 clients, and my mother was not the only one. There were 4 others. 3 of them were elderly. One of them was the couple from her church. Jean had died the year before, and Barbara, his widow, hadn't looked at the accounts since. Arthur Fleck surrendered his registration voluntarily in January and agreed to a consent order requiring restitution of just under $90,000 across all 5 affected clients. There was also a referral to the State Attorney General's office for criminal review. I don't know what came of that. My attorney told me those things move slowly and I should not expect closure on a timeline that matched my own needs, which is a thing people who are good at their jobs say when they want to be honest with you without being brutal about it. My mother's portion of the restitution, adjusted for interest and fees per the consent order, came to just under $31,000. It was deposited into the estate account 6 months after I filed the complaint. I used part of it to finish the roof. I've thought a lot about why she didn't tell me sooner. I've had moments of being angry about it. In the middle of the night, the kind of anger that doesn't have anywhere clean to go. She was protecting me. I understand that. I even understand the logic of it, that she didn't want to divide my attention while she was dying. That she wanted to be the thing I focused on in those last weeks and not a fraud case. I understand all of it, but there are nights when I think about her sitting alone in that kitchen with her calculator and her highlighter and her stack of statements, figuring out that someone she trusted had been stealing from her, and then carrying that knowledge alone for months, writing it down in careful cursive on legal pad paper, locking it in a metal box, hiding it in the attic where she knew I'd eventually have to deal with the roof. She was so certain I'd deal with the roof. And I just think about how much she carried. How quietly. How completely alone. She was right that I would deal with the roof. She was right about all of it. The cardigan is still in my closet. I haven't washed it. I know eventually I'll have to, or I'll have to make peace with never washing it. One or the other. I took the 20 out of the pocket that first week, and I drove to a diner in Milford, and I got a hot turkey sandwich and a slice of apple pie, and I sat in a booth by the window, and I ate it alone, and I thought about her the whole time. It was, I think, the best $20 she ever spent. I still have the house. I've been spending more time there lately. The roof is solid now. I go up to the attic sometimes, not for any reason, just to stand there in the gray light with the smell of old insulation and the sound of the wind against the new shingles, and I think about what she left me. Not just the money, not just the box. The whole long, careful trail of a person who loved me enough to plan ahead, to think it through, to trust me to finish what she started. I didn't know she was that kind of person. I mean, I knew she was organized. I knew she was thorough. But I think of her now as someone who was brave in a way I didn't fully recognize while she was alive. She was scared, and she was sick, and she was alone in that kitchen. And she still put the pieces together, and she still made sure I'd find them. I think about that a lot. I think about that most days. I've spent a lot of time thinking about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any grand philosophical sense. Just the plain practical kind. The kind where you trace a line backward and see exactly how one thing led to the next, and you realize the outcome wasn't luck. It was the result of choices. A long, quiet chain of them. My mother made a choice to pay attention. She wasn't a financial expert. She was a 71-year-old woman with a calculator and a kitchen table. And she sat down one afternoon to update her will, and something didn't add up. She could have told herself she was confused. Arthur had already used that word on her once, and she knew he'd use it again. She could have decided it was too complicated, too embarrassing, too much to deal with at her age. A lot of people would have. I'm not sure I wouldn't have in her place. She didn't. She went back. She pushed. She found Janet Riley on her own, through a referral service, and she drove to Concord, and she laid it all out, and she started building something. Quietly, carefully, without telling anyone. Because she was afraid and uncertain and doing it anyway. That is not a small thing. That is, I think, one of the harder forms of courage, the kind that doesn't look like courage from the outside, that just looks like an old woman making phone calls and keeping folders. And Arthur. I think about him too, but differently. What he did wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a pattern, repeated over 3 years across 5 clients, most of them elderly, most of them alone. He counted on their confusion. He counted on their embarrassment. He counted on the fact that people who have spent their whole lives being careful and responsible will sometimes find it easier to doubt themselves than to believe they were taken advantage of. He built his whole scheme on that assumption, and it worked for a while. Until it didn't, because my mother decided to be the kind of person who checks. And then she decided to be the kind of person who keeps going after she checks. And then, even when she got sick, even when she had every reason to let it go and spend her last months in peace, she decided to be the kind of person who finishes what she started, even if finishing meant trusting me to carry it across the line. That's the part I come back to the most. She didn't know I'd find the box. She hoped. She planned for it. The roof. She knew about the roof, but she couldn't be certain. She put everything in order, and then she had to trust that the person she raised would do the right thing with it. That kind of trust is its own form of intelligence. It says, I have done what I can do. Now I pass it forward. I think about what it takes to be that kind of person. Careful enough to notice. Stubborn enough to keep going after someone tries to make you feel small. Patient enough to build a case instead of just an accusation. And at the end, brave enough to let go and trust someone else to finish it. I don't know that I had all of those qualities before this. I'm not sure I have all of them now. But I know what they look like. I've seen the evidence of them. 6 pages of legal pad paper in careful slanted cursive tucked in a metal box behind a loose board in an attic in Milford. I'm trying to be that thorough. I'm trying to pay that much attention, not because someone is stealing from me, as far as I know, but because that's what she modeled. That's what she left me, along with the house and the cardigan and the $20. A way of moving through the world that says, look carefully, push back when something's wrong, keep records, and don't let the people who count on your silence win. Arthur Fleck counted on silence. My mother gave him years of it, partly out of fear, partly out of love for me, but she didn't give him everything. She saved the last piece for herself, and then she gave it to me instead.